Orphan hid in a mountain hole, and what she found shocked the town. Ashley ran through the dusty streets of Golden Ridge without looking back, her tears mixing with the sweat streaming down her thin face. The fifth rejection in 2 years had shattered her 8-year-old heart in a way she didn't know was possible. The last family had been clear. She was too difficult, too closed off, didn't fit in. What she had found in that dark hole in the mountain would not only change her life but would shake the very foundations of the entire town of Golden Ridge. Inside the damp cave, her small, trembling hands touched something that shouldn't have been there. A metal box buried decades ago, holding secrets that some very powerful people would prefer remained hidden forever. The girl ran aimlessly through the streets she knew like the back of her hand. Every corner, every alley, every shop doorway was familiar after years of wandering alone while the other children from the shelter played in the yard. Ashley had always preferred the solitude of the streets to the forced company of the other orphans, who saw her as strange for not crying when adoptions fell through. Mrs. Margaret, the director of St. Joseph's Home, had tried to explain once again that not all families were prepared for children with Ashley's profile. The word sounded like a condemnation, profile, as if she were a problem to be solved, an impossible puzzle to piece together. Evening fell over Golden Ridge when Ashley finally stopped running. Her bare feet were cut by stones, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emptiness she felt in her chest. She looked around and realized she had climbed higher up the mountain than she had ever dared before. The town's houses looked tiny down below, like toys scattered by a child. The cold mountain wind made her worn clothes flutter. It was a simple cotton dress that had belonged to at least 3 other girls before her. The sandals were worn out and too big, a hand-me-down from some donation that had arrived at the shelter. Ashley always dressed in leftovers, always got what nobody else wanted. That's when she saw the opening in the rock, a black hole that seemed to suck in the twilight light, inviting in its promise of shelter. Ashley didn't think twice before approaching. Anything was better than going back to the shelter and facing Mrs. Margaret's pitying looks, or worse, the other children's whispers about yet another rejection. The cave was larger than it seemed from the outside. Ashley could stand without touching the ceiling, and there was enough space for her to stretch out fully on the uneven ground. The stone was cold against her hands, but there was a strange feeling of safety in that place isolated from the world. No one would find her there. No one would reject her. No one would say she wasn't good enough. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The hours passed and Ashley remained curled up at the back of the cave, listening to the sounds of nature quiet down with the arrival of night. The cold was becoming intense, but she preferred that to the fake warmth of the families who had rejected her. At least the cold was honest. It didn't pretend to like her only to later decide she wasn't good enough. It was when she decided to explore her new refuge better that Ashley made the discovery that would change everything. Her hands searched for a more comfortable position on the ground when they touched something different from stone. It was loose dirt, as if someone had dug there long ago. Curiosity, stronger than tiredness, made her dig with her fingernails until she felt something hard. A metal box, small but heavy, emerged from the earth with difficulty. Ashley used a sharp stone to force the opening, and the screech of rusty metal echoed through the cave like a cry of protest. When she finally managed to pry it open, the contents left her breathless. Photographs yellowed with time, letters written in careful script, documents she couldn't properly read, and a rudimentary map of the city. But it was one specific photo that made her heart race. 2 young people embracing, smiling at the camera, in front of the main bank in Golden Ridge. The woman was pregnant and had a protective hand on her belly. Ashley held the photograph with trembling hands. There was something about those faces that touched her in an inexplicable way. The woman had the same dark eyes that Ashley saw in the mirror, and the man had the same curly brown hair she tried to tame every morning. Could it be that? She turned the photo over and found a single word written in pencil. Hope. Nothing more. Just that word, which seemed to carry the weight of all the dreams in the world. Ashley carefully placed the photograph in her dress pocket and began to examine the letters. Most were written in language she didn't fully understand, but some words jumped out at her. Project. affordable housing, society, bank. One of the letters was better preserved than the others. The handwriting was feminine and delicate, and Ashley managed to decipher a few sentences. It spoke of a dream to build homes for families in need, of hopes placed in a project that would change the lives of many people. The letter ended with a signature that made Ashley's heart nearly stop. With love, Sarah Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell. The same last name that appeared on Ashley's birth certificate, kept in the shelter's files. Could it be a coincidence? Or had she finally found some clue about her true origin? The girl carefully folded the letter and stored it with the photograph. The rest of the material stayed in the box, but she knew she needed to study everything more carefully. The night was late when Ashley finally managed to fall asleep in the back of the cave, clutching the metal box as if it were her most precious treasure. For the first time in years, she slept deeply, lulled not by lullabies, but by the promise that perhaps finally she could discover who she really was. The dawn arrived cold and damp. Ashley woke up with her body aching, but with a determination she had never felt before. She had clues about her past, and she wouldn't rest until she discovered the whole truth. The first thing she needed to do was return to the city and discreetly investigate the places and people mentioned in the documents. Hiding the box in a deeper crevice of the cave, Ashley descended the mountain with determined steps. Her strategy would be simple. Use her natural ability to go unnoticed, to observe and gather information. Years of living as an orphan had taught her to become almost invisible when necessary. The Golden Ridge Bank stood in the central square, an imposing building that contrasted with the simple constructions around it. Ashley positioned herself on a bench in the square, pretending to feed the pigeons while observing the activity. Well-dressed employees came and went, and occasionally a luxury car stopped in front of the building. It was then that she saw the man who would change the course of her investigation. An older gentleman with graying hair, an elegant bearing, and an impeccable suit stepped out of a black Lincoln. He greeted the employees with familiarity and was clearly an important person in the bank's hierarchy. Ashley decided to follow him discreetly. The man walked with the confidence of someone who was on his own turf. Ashley kept her distance, using newspaper stands and trees in the square as cover. When he entered the bank, she approached the storefront and pretended to look at the promotional posters, but she was actually trying to listen to the conversations inside. "Good morning, Mr. Richard," said an employee. "The monthly report is on your desk." Mr. Richard. Ashley committed the name to memory. She needed to find out more about this man. For the rest of the morning, she remained nearby, observing the bank's routine and memorizing faces. When Mr. Richard left for lunch, she decided to follow him again. The path led Ashley to the most upscale neighborhood of Golden Ridge, where the houses were large and the gardens well kept. Mr. Richard entered a mansion surrounded by high walls and wrought iron gates. Ashley found an observation spot behind some bushes on the neighboring property. It was then that she saw the woman who would send her investigation in an unexpected turn. An elderly lady leaning on an elegant cane walked slowly through the mansion's garden. She moved among rose bushes with extreme care, as if each flower were a priceless treasure. There was a deep sadness in her movements, a melancholy that Ashley recognized immediately. The woman stopped before a stone bench in the center of the garden, where a framed photograph rested against the cushions. Even from a distance, Ashley could see that the photo showed a young couple embracing. The lady picked up the portrait with trembling hands and began talking to herself, her words carried by the wind to Ashley. "Sarah, my dear friend," murmured the woman, "if only I knew what really happened to you and David. If only I'd had the courage to search for the truth." Ashley's heart raced. Sarah, the same name from the letter she'd found in the cave. And David. Could these be the people in the photograph? The girl moved cautiously closer, crawling through the bushes to hear better. "Forgive me for not protecting your daughter," the lady continued, now with tears in her eyes. "Wherever she is, I hope she found a family that loves her. I should have insisted more. I should have searched." Ashley could barely breathe. That woman knew her parents, and more importantly, she knew about her. The girl was about to reveal herself when she heard footsteps approaching. A simple man, dressed in work clothes, walked toward the lady in the garden. "Mrs. Eleanor," the man said in a respectful voice, "you should go inside. The sun is very strong, and the doctor said to avoid the heat." "I'm fine, Mr. George," the woman replied kindly. "I just need a few more minutes with them." Mr. George nodded and stepped away discreetly, but Ashley noticed he kept casting worried glances in the lady's direction. There was something paternal in his attention, as if he genuinely cared for her well-being. The girl decided she needed to talk to this man too. When Mrs. Eleanor finally went inside, Ashley waited until she was sure she was alone before approaching the gardener. Mr. George was watering the plants near the wall, softly whistling a melancholy tune. Ashley cleared her throat to get his attention. The man turned abruptly, nearly dropping the watering can. When he saw the dirty girl in worn-out clothes, his first instinct was to protect the property. "What are you doing here, girl?" he asked in a warning tone. "This is private property. You can't be here." Ashley swallowed hard, but her determination to discover the truth was greater than her fear. "Please, don't send me away," she said with a trembling voice. "I heard the lady talking about Sarah and David. Were they my parents?" The gardener's expression changed instantly. Suspicion gave way to astonishment and then to intense curiosity. He moved closer to the girl, studying her face carefully. "How do you know these names?" asked Mr. George, his voice now lower and more careful. Ashley pulled the photograph from her pocket and showed it to him. The man took the portrait with hands that trembled slightly, and his eyes widened. "Good heavens," he murmured. "It's her. Sarah was pregnant in this picture. You would be—" "Their daughter," Ashley completed. "I've lived at St. Joseph's Home since I was a baby. No one ever knew who my parents were. I found this photo and other things hidden in the mountain." Mr. George looked around nervously, as if afraid they might be overheard. He gestured for Ashley to move away from the wall and led her to a more secluded area of the garden, behind a large mango tree. "Child," he said in a low voice, "what you're stirring up is very dangerous. There are secrets in this family that could hurt a lot of people, especially you." "I don't care about the danger," Ashley replied firmly. "I need to know the truth. Did you know my parents?" The gardener sighed deeply and looked toward the house where Mrs. Eleanor had disappeared behind the curtains. After a long moment of hesitation, he began to speak. "I've worked here for 30 years, said Mr. George. "I've seen a lot happen in this house. Sarah Mitchell was Mrs. Eleanor's best friend since childhood. They were inseparable. David was an honest, hard-working young man who loved Sarah more than life itself." Ashley felt each word, as if it were a sacred revelation. Finally, someone could speak about her parents as real people, not just as names on documents. "What happened to them?" she asked, though she feared the answer. "They vanished overnight," said Mr. George, his voice heavy with sadness. "Sarah was in her final stage of pregnancy, almost ready to give birth. One day they were here visiting Mrs. Eleanor and planning for the baby's future. The next they had completely disappeared." "And the baby? Me?" asked Ashley, though she already knew part of the answer. "They found you at the shelter a few days later, Mrs. Eleanor wanted to take you home, but her husband, Mr. Richard, said it wouldn't be appropriate, that it could cause talk in town. Mrs. Eleanor never forgave herself for not insisting more." Ashley felt the world spinning around her. Mrs. Eleanor had wanted to take care of her, but her husband prevented it. Mr. Richard, the man she had seen leaving the bank. And now she began to understand why he didn't want his wife to adopt Marina and Roberto's daughter. "Mr. George," said Ashley, choosing her words carefully, "do you think Mr. Richard had something to do with my parents' disappearance?" The gardener grew visibly nervous. He looked again at the house and then leaned closer to the girl. "I can't say for sure," he whispered, "but I can tell you that after Sarah and David vanished, things changed a lot around here. Mr. Richard became more controlling, and Mrs. Eleanor was never the same. It's as if she knew something terrible had happened, but didn't have the courage to find out what." Ashley nodded, absorbing each piece of information like gold. She was building a puzzle, and the pieces were starting to make sense, but there was still much to discover. "Could you help me find out the truth?" she asked hopefully. Mr. George hesitated for a long moment. Ashley could see the internal struggle on the man's face between loyalty to his job and compassion for the lost child before him. "It's very risky," he said finally. "If Mr. Richard finds out we're investigating the past, he could... Well, he's a very powerful man in this town." "Please," Ashley insisted, "I have no one else. You're the only person who can help me understand who I really am." The girl's plea touched the gardener's heart in a way he hadn't expected. There was something in those dark eyes that so reminded her of Sarah and the fierce determination of David. As if the best of both parents had manifested in their daughter. "All right," said Mr. George after another moment of hesitation, "but you have to be very careful. And if things get too dangerous, do you promise you'll leave and never come back?" Ashley nodded vigorously, though deep down she knew she couldn't keep such a promise. She had come too far to give up now. "First," said Mr. George, "you need to understand how this house works. Mr. Richard goes to the bank every morning at 8 and comes back for lunch at noon. Mrs. Eleanor spends her afternoons in the garden or the library. On Tuesdays and Thursdays she goes to the doctor in town. That's when the house is emptiest." "And the documents?" asked Ashley. "Where does Mr. Richard keep the important papers?" "In his private library. But it's locked, and he always carries the key. The only exception is when he's bathing, before bed. He leaves everything on the nightstand." Ashley absorbed every detail, already forming a plan in her mind. It would be risky, but she had learned to be brave during all those years of rejection and loneliness. "Tomorrow is Tuesday," said Mr. George. "If you really want to do this, it's the best opportunity. But I can't help you directly. I can't lose this job. It's all I have." "I understand," said Ashley. "I just need you to tell me how to get into the house unseen." The gardener explained about a back door that led to the kitchen, and that during Mrs. Eleanor's doctor visits, it usually stayed unlocked so he could come in and water the indoor plants. It would be a small window of opportunity, but enough. "And if I find something important," asked Ashley. "Then we take it to Mrs. Eleanor first," said Mr. George. "She has the right to know the truth about her friend. And maybe she'll finally find the courage to confront her husband." Ashley agreed and prepared to leave, but first turned to the gardener one last time. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me at all." Mr. George smiled sadly. "Because I saw what happened to your parents. I've seen Mrs. Eleanor's pain all these years, and mostly because every child deserves to know where they came from. You have the right to know your story, girl." The man's words warmed Ashley's heart in a way she hadn't expected. For the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her, believing she deserved the truth. It was a new and powerful feeling. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Ashley spent the night in the cave, studying all the documents from the box again. Now that she had more information, she could better understand the content of the letters. There were references to a housing project that would be developed in partnership between her parents and Mr. Richard's bank. The land would be purchased with Sarah and David's savings, and the bank would provide the financing for the construction. One of the most revealing letters was signed by Mr. Richard himself, confirming the agreement and praising the social vision of the project. "It will be an honor to work with you on this initiative that will change the lives of so many needy families," the letter said. The tone was cordial and optimistic, very different from the reality Ashley was uncovering. Another document showed that Sarah and David had invested all their savings in the purchase of the land. It was a considerable sum for a young couple, the result of years of hard work and shared dreams. The document was signed and notarized, proving they were the legitimate owners of the land. Ashley fell asleep late and woke up early, anxious for the day that would change everything. During the morning, she remained hidden around the mansion, observing the family's routine. Exactly as Mr. George had said, Mr. Richard left at 8 o'clock, and Mrs. Eleanor prepared for her Tuesday medical appointment. At 2 in the afternoon, a car came to pick up Mrs. Eleanor. Ashley watched from a distance as the elderly lady entered the vehicle with difficulty, leaning on her cane. There was a fragility in her that contrasted with the determination Ashley had seen in the garden. 15 minutes later, Mr. George gave the agreed signal. He discreetly waved toward the bushes where Ashley was hiding. The coast was clear. The girl ran to the back door, which was slightly ajar as planned. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than the exterior. Persian rugs covered marble floors and expensive paintings adorned the walls. Ashley had never been in such a luxurious place. For a moment, she felt small and out of place, but she remembered the purpose of her mission. The library was on the second floor according to Mr. George's instructions. Ashley carefully climbed the wooden staircase, avoiding the steps that might creak. The upstairs hallway was lined with more paintings, including family portraits showing a younger Mr. Richard next to Mrs. Eleanor. The library door was locked as expected, but Ashley had prepared a solution for that. During her years wandering the streets, she had learned some unconventional skills, including how to open simple locks with improvised objects. A bobby pin found in the shelter's bathroom had become her preferred tool. It took a few minutes of nervous attempts, but finally the lock gave way. Ashley entered the library and was immediately overwhelmed by the number of books and documents. There were shelves from floor to ceiling, a large desk in the center, and several metal filing cabinets. Where to begin? Ashley decided to focus first on the desk, where scattered papers might contain recent information. Most were routine banking documents, but one file caught her attention. Cancelled projects, 1990-2000. Ashley's heart raced. She opened the file and began to leaf through the documents. There were several projects that had been discontinued for different reasons: lack of economic viability, changes in legislation, problems with suppliers, and then she found what she was looking for. Green Hill Housing Project, cancelled due to extraordinary circumstances, read the header. Just below the names that made her heart beat faster: Sarah Mitchell and David Mitchell, partners. The official document simply stated that the project had been cancelled due to the disappearance of the partners. There were no details about the circumstances, just a handwritten note in the margin: land reverted to the bank due to abandonment by the original owners. Ashley felt a wave of indignation. Her parents hadn't abandoned anything. Something had happened to them, and Mr. Richard was benefiting from it. She photographed the document with a disposable camera she had bought with coins found on the street, determined to preserve the evidence. Continuing her search, she found a separate folder with more personal documents, letters, notes, and finally, what made her blood run cold: a leather-bound journal, hidden behind old economics books. The journal was open to a page dated March 1999, a few months before her parents' disappearance. The handwriting was Mrs. Eleanor's, delicate but firm. Sarah came to visit me today, worried about some changes in Richard's behavior regarding the project. She said he was hesitant about proceeding, arguing that the costs were higher than anticipated. I tried to calm my friend, but I confess I've also noticed a different coldness in my husband. Ashley continued reading, her hands trembling. David was firm about moving forward, said they had already invested everything they had and that they couldn't give up now. Sarah is 8 months pregnant, and they need the project to succeed to secure their daughter's future. I promised I would talk to Richard, but he has been so distant lately. The following pages revealed a gradual deterioration in the relationship between the two couples. Richard began avoiding meetings, then started openly questioning the project's viability. Mrs. Eleanor recorded her growing concern not only for the business, but for the friendship she had built over a lifetime. The most disturbing entry was dated 1 week before the disappearance. Terrible argument today. Richard said clearly that he wants out of the project and suggested that Sarah and David do the same. When David refused, my husband said horrible things about them being naive dreamers who didn't understand business. Sarah left in tears. I've never seen my friend so desperate. I'm starting to not recognize the man I married. The last entry on the matter was devastating. Sarah and David have disappeared. No one knows where they are. Richard says they decided to leave town, but I've known Sarah since we were children. She would never leave without saying goodbye to me. Something terrible happened. I feel it in my heart, and I'm afraid to find out what it was. Ashley closed the diary with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Eleanor had always known something was wrong, but never had the courage to investigate. And now Ashley understood why. Discovering the truth would mean confronting her husband and possibly destroying her marriage. But there was more. Ashley found a locked drawer in the desk, which she managed to open with the same hairpin. Inside, documents that confirmed her worst suspicions. Altered contracts, where the names of Sarah and David had been removed and replaced by the bank as the sole owner of the land. The signatures were clearly forged. The most shocking was an unsent letter, written in Mr. Richard's own hand. "Sarah and David, for safety reasons, I advise you to leave town immediately. There are people questioning the legitimacy of our project, and I fear you may be harmed. The land will be kept secure by the bank until it is possible to resume work. Do not try to contact me for the next few months." The letter was dated the day before the disappearance. It was proof that Mr. Richard not only knew they were going to leave, but had orchestrated the entire situation. Ashley photographed all the documents, her hands shaking with nerves and indignation. It was then that she heard the sound of a car arriving. Her heart almost stopped. It was too early for Mrs. Eleanor to return from her appointment, but perhaps Mr. Richard had decided to come back early from the bank. Ashley quickly put the documents back in their original places and left the library, locking the door behind her. She managed to reach the ground floor when she heard the key turning in the front door lock. There was no time to leave through the back door without being seen. Ashley hid behind a heavy curtain in the living room, praying not to be discovered. To her surprise, it was Mrs. Eleanor who entered, leaning heavily on her cane and clearly exhausted. The medical appointment had ended early, or perhaps the mansion's clock was slow. The elderly lady went directly to an armchair in the room, very close to where Ashley was hiding. "George!" called Mrs. Eleanor in a tired voice. "George, could you bring me some tea?" Ashley heard Mr. George's footsteps approaching. The gardener appeared in the room with a worried expression upon seeing his employer back so early. "How was the appointment, Mrs. Eleanor?" he asked carefully. "The doctor wants to run more tests," she replied sadly. "He said I'm losing weight and that I look worn down." As if I didn't know that already. Ashley remained motionless behind the curtain, but she could feel the melancholy in the woman's voice. There was a fragility there that went beyond health problems. "Mrs. Eleanor," said Mr. George hesitantly, "may I ask something? Are you taking your medication properly?" "What difference does it make, George?" replied Mrs. Eleanor bitterly. "The medicine doesn't cure what's really killing me. The guilt, the remorse, everything I should have done differently." Ashley felt her heart race. It was as if Mrs. Eleanor was speaking directly to her, revealing the secrets she had carried for years. "You're not to blame for anything," said Mr. George kindly. "Yes, I am, George," replied Mrs. Eleanor, and Ashley could hear the tears in her voice. "I should have looked for Sarah when she disappeared. I should have investigated, I should have questioned my husband, and most of all, I should have insisted on adopting her daughter." Ashley could barely breathe. Mrs. Eleanor was talking about her, expressing the remorse she had carried for almost 9 years. "Every day I think about that little baby," continued Mrs. Eleanor. "Where is she? Is she being well cared for? Does someone love her like Sarah would have? I failed my best friend, George. I failed her when she needed me most." Tears streamed down Ashley's face. She wanted to step out from behind the curtain and embrace that woman who carried a pain so similar to her own. But she knew it wasn't the right time. There was still much to uncover. Mr. George served the tea and discreetly withdrew, leaving Mrs. Eleanor alone with her thoughts. The elderly lady remained in the armchair for over an hour, flipping through photo albums that showed her and Sarah at different moments in life. Children playing in the garden, teenagers at school parties, young women at their weddings. When Mrs. Eleanor finally went up to her room, Ashley managed to leave the mansion unseen. Mr. George was waiting for her near the back gate, anxious to know the outcome of the mission. "Did you find anything?" he asked in a low voice. "I did," replied Ashley, still processing everything she had discovered. "And it's worse than we imagined." She told the gardener about the forged documents, the unsent letter, and the revelations from Mrs. Eleanor's diary. Mr. George was visibly shaken by the information. "My God," he murmured. "I suspected Mr. Richard was hiding something, but this is very serious." "What do we do now?" asked Ashley. Mr. George thought for a long moment before answering. "First, you need to be safe," he said. "If Mr. Richard finds out you exist and that you're investigating, he might try to do to you what he did to your parents." The possibility frightened Ashley, but it did not deter her from her purpose. "And Mrs. Eleanor?" she asked. "She has the right to know the truth." "She does," agreed Mr. George, "but we have to be very careful about how we reveal it to her. It could be a terrible shock for a woman her age." Ashley nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. They decided it would be best to prepare Mrs. Eleanor gradually, perhaps starting by revealing Ashley's existence before exposing her husband's crimes. "Tomorrow is Wednesday," said Mr. George. "Mr. Richard has an important meeting at the bank that usually lasts all afternoon. It would be a good opportunity for you to talk with Mrs. Eleanor." "What if she doesn't believe me?" asked Ashley, voicing a fear that tormented her. "The evidence you found will speak for itself," said Mr. George. "And besides, anyone can see you have Sarah's eyes. Mrs. Eleanor will recognize it immediately." That night Ashley slept in the cave with mixed feelings. On one hand, she was closer to the truth than she had ever been. On the other, the magnitude of what she had discovered frightened her. Mr. Richard wasn't just a greedy man, but someone capable of destroying entire families to protect his interests. The morning arrived grey and rainy. Ashley interpreted the weather as a reflection of her feelings, gloomy, but with the promise that after the storm would come renewal. She spent the day observing the mansion from afar, waiting for the right moment to approach. At 2 in the afternoon, Mr. Richard left in his black Lincoln. Ashley waited another 15 minutes before approaching the house. Mr. George received her in the garden with a discreet nod and led her to where Mrs. Eleanor was tending to her rose bushes. The elderly lady was more fragile that day, moving with difficulty among the plants. When she saw Ashley approaching, her first reaction was surprise and concern. "George, who is this girl?" asked Mrs. Eleanor, leaning more firmly on her cane. Mr. George took a deep breath before answering. "Mrs. Eleanor, this is a very special child. She has something important to show you." Ashley approached slowly, taking the photograph from her pocket. With trembling hands, she offered the image to Mrs. Eleanor. The lady's reaction was immediate and dramatic. "My God," whispered Mrs. Eleanor, taking the photo with hands that began to shake violently. Where did you get this?" "I found it hidden in the mountain," said Ashley in a soft voice, "along with other things that belonged to Sarah and David Mitchell." Mrs. Eleanor looked at Ashley with renewed attention, studying every feature of the girl's face. Gradually, recognition began to dawn in her eyes. "You have her eyes," she murmured. "Exactly the same dark, expressive eyes. And the hair, it's just like David's when he was young." Ashley nodded, feeling intense emotion as she saw the recognition on Mrs. Eleanor's face. "My name is Ashley Mitchell," she said, "and I believe Sarah and David were my parents." Mrs. Eleanor sank heavily onto the stone bench in the garden, still holding the photograph as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Tears began to stream down her wrinkled face. "Sarah's daughter," she whispered. "You are Sarah's daughter. After all these years, how is this possible?" Ashley sat down beside the elderly lady and began to tell her story. She spoke about the years in the shelter, the families that had rejected her, her escape to the mountain, and the discovery of the buried box. Mrs. Eleanor listened to every word with intense attention, alternating between tears and exclamations of astonishment. "I always knew something terrible had happened," said Mrs. Eleanor when Ashley finished speaking. "Sarah would never have left without saying goodbye. She loved me like a sister." "Mrs. Eleanor," Ashley said carefully, "I discovered more things about what really happened to my parents, but it might be hard to hear." The elderly lady straightened on the bench, gathering strength that Ashley didn't know she possessed. "Tell me everything," she said with determination. "I have carried this guilt for years. I need to know the truth, no matter how painful it is." Ashley took out the photographs of the documents she had found in the library and began to show each piece of evidence. Mrs. Eleanor examined the forged contracts, the unsent letter, the notes that proved Mr. Richard had orchestrated the disappearance of Sarah and David. With each revelation, Mrs. Eleanor's expression changed. Sadness gave way to disbelief, then to horror, and finally to a rage that Ashley never expected to see in that fragile woman. "He lied to me all these years," said Mrs. Eleanor, her voice trembling with anger. "While I was consumed with guilt, he knew exactly what had happened, and he didn't tell me." "There's more," said Ashley hesitantly. "I found the lady's diary. I read about your suspicions and your pain. You always knew something was wrong." Mrs. Eleanor nodded slowly. "I knew, but I didn't have the courage to confront him. I was afraid to discover that the man I married was capable of terrible things." "And now," asked Ashley, "what do we do with this information?" Mrs. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, looking at the rose bushes she had cared for so lovingly all those years. When she finally spoke, there was a determination in her voice that surprised Ashley. "Now we confront him," she said. "Richard is going to give me answers, and he's going to take responsibility for what he did." "But what if he denies everything?" asked Ashley. "He can't deny the evidence," replied Mrs. Eleanor, carefully putting away the photographs of the documents. "And besides, I'm going to do something I should have done a long time ago." "What?" asked Ashley. "I'm going to adopt you officially," said Mrs. Eleanor, taking the girl's hand in hers. "I should have done it when you were a baby. It's time to correct my mistakes and honor the memory of my best friend." Mrs. Eleanor's words touched Ashley in a way she didn't expect. For the first time in her life, someone was actively choosing to care for her, not out of obligation or charity, but out of genuine love and a sense of justice. "But will Mr. Richard allow this?" asked Ashley worriedly. The smile that appeared on Mrs. Eleanor's face was the first Ashley had seen since meeting her. "My dear," she said, "after what we discovered today, Richard is in no position to deny anything. In fact, he'll be lucky if I don't turn him over to the authorities." Mr. George, who had remained discreetly apart during the conversation, approached with a relieved expression. It was evident that he too was moved by the turn of events. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, "may I suggest we wait for Mr. Richard to arrive for dinner? It would be safer to confront him at home than at the bank, where he has more control." "Good idea, George," agreed Mrs. Eleanor. "And you, Ashley, will stay here with us. I don't want you going back to that cold cave. This is your home now." The rest of the afternoon passed quickly, with Mrs. Eleanor showing Ashley the house where her mother had played as a child. There were pictures of Sarah scattered throughout the mansion, records of a friendship that had lasted decades. Ashley could finally see how her mother had been loved and cherished. "Sarah was the most generous person I knew," Mrs. Eleanor recounted as they looked through old albums. "Always thinking of how to help others. The housing project was her idea, you know. She wanted poor families to have decent homes as a basic right." "And my father?" asked Ashley, eager for any information about David. "Your father was perfect for her," Mrs. Eleanor replied fondly. "Honest, hard-working, and completely in love with Sarah. They complemented each other in a beautiful way to see. And they were so happy about the pregnancy." The stories continued until dusk, when they heard the sound of Mr. Richard's Lincoln arriving. Mrs. Eleanor immediately changed her posture, straightening her shoulders and assuming a determined expression Ashley hadn't seen before. "The time has come," she said. "Ashley, I want you to stay close, but let me lead the conversation initially. George, thank you for everything you did for us today." Mr. Richard entered the house with his usual routine, calling for Mrs. Eleanor and complaining about the traffic. When he saw Ashley sitting in the living room next to his wife, his expression changed immediately. "Eleanor, who is this child?" he asked coldly. "Why are you in our house?" "This is Ashley Mitchell," said Mrs. Eleanor, and Ashley noticed how she emphasized the last name. "Marina's daughter." Mr. Richard's reaction was immediate and telling. All the color drained from his face, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. When he finally regained his composure, his voice was strained. "That's impossible," he said. "Marina's daughter. We don't know where she is. It could be anyone trying to take advantage of the situation." "Ah, but I know exactly where she was all these years," said Mrs. Eleanor, her voice laden with accusation. "At St. Joseph's Home, the very shelter where you insisted she should stay when I wanted to adopt her." Mr. Richard realized he was being cornered, but tried to maintain the facade. "Eleanor, you're confused. There was never any certainty that that baby was Marina and David's child. It would have been irresponsible of us to take in a child without being sure. Then explain this, said Mrs. Eleanor, showing the photograph Ashley had found, and explain how this girl managed to find hidden documents that prove exactly what happened to my friends, Mr. Richard took the photograph with hands that trembled slightly. Ashley could see he was desperately trying to find a plausible explanation. "Where did you get this?" he asked directly to Ashley. "In the mountain," she answered bravely. "Along with other things you thought were lost forever." Mr. Richard's expression turned dangerous. "What other things?" "Richard," intervened Mrs. Eleanor, "I think you'd better sit down. We have a lot to talk about." What followed was one of the most tense conversations that house had ever witnessed. Mrs. Eleanor presented each piece of evidence methodically: the forged contracts, the unsent letter, the financial manipulations. Mr. Richard tried to deny, then to justify, and finally to threaten. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he said, the mask of respectability finally falling. "I built my reputation in this town over decades. I won't let some orphan with fanciful ideas destroy it." "Fanciful?" repeated Mrs. Eleanor with disbelief. "I'm seeing with my own eyes the documents that prove your crimes. How can you call that fanciful?" "Crimes?" Mr. Richard laughed bitterly. "I protected this family from a disastrous investment. Sarah and David were dreamers who didn't understand business. If I had allowed the project to proceed, we would have lost everything." "So you forced them to flee town and took their land illegally?" asked Ashley, finding courage in Mrs. Eleanor's presence. "I advised them to leave before they lost even more money," replied Mr. Richard. "If they decided not to return, that wasn't my fault." "Liar!" exclaimed Mrs. Eleanor. "I read your letter. You threatened them, said there were people questioning the project. You drove them out of town." The argument was escalating dangerously. Mr. Richard rose from the armchair, clearly agitated. "Enough!" he shouted. "I won't sit here listening to accusations from a senile woman and a lying orphan. Eleanor, this child is clearly trying to take advantage of you. I'll resolve the situation tomorrow." "What do you mean by resolve?" asked Mrs. Eleanor, and there was real fear in her voice. Mr. Richard headed for the door, but before leaving, he turned to Ashley with an expression that made her blood run cold. "Girl," he said in a low, threatening voice, "you don't know what you've gotten yourself into. You'd better forget these fantasies and go back to where you came from." After he left, slamming the door hard, Mrs. Eleanor turned to Ashley with evident concern. "He's scared," she said, "and scared men do desperate things. You can't go back to the mountain alone. It's very dangerous." "But what can we do?" asked Ashley. "He's right about one thing. He's a powerful person in this city. Who will believe the word of an orphan over his?" Mrs. Eleanor reflected for a moment before answering. "We have the evidence," she said, "and we have something more important. We have the truth. First thing tomorrow we'll go to the notary to register your adoption, and then we'll seek out the proper authorities." That night, Ashley slept in a real bed for the first time, in the room that had been prepared for her by Mrs. Eleanor. But sleep did not come easily. Mr. Richard's threats echoed in her mind, and she wondered if she had put Mrs. Eleanor in danger by revealing the truth. In the early hours of the morning, Ashley was awakened by strange sounds coming from the floor below. Careful footsteps, as if someone was trying not to make noise. Her heart raced when she realized Mr. Richard had returned and was searching the house. She got up silently and went to the bedroom window. Down below, she could see flashlight light moving through the library. Mr. Richard was looking for something, probably trying to hide or destroy evidence that could further incriminate him. Ashley knew she needed to warn Mrs. Eleanor, but she also didn't want to alert Mr. Richard. She decided to leave the room and go to where the elderly lady was sleeping. In the hallway, she could better hear the sounds from the library, papers being shuffled, drawers being opened and closed, books being moved. "Mrs. Eleanor," she whispered, waking the elderly lady. "Your husband is downstairs going through the documents." Mrs. Eleanor awoke immediately, all her instincts alert despite her age. "He must be trying to hide or destroy evidence," she murmured. "We can't let that happen." "What do we do?" asked Ashley. Mrs. Eleanor thought quickly. "You stay here, And if you hear any sound of an argument, call Mr. George immediately. I'll go down and confront him." "It's very dangerous," protested Ashley. "He won't hurt his own wife," said Mrs. Eleanor, though she didn't seem completely convinced. "But I need to stop him from destroying important evidence." Mrs. Eleanor went down the stairs with her cane, making an intentional noise to alert Mr. Richard to her presence. Ashley remained at the top of the staircase, listening to the conversation that unfolded. "What are you doing, Richard?" asked Mrs. Eleanor as she entered the library. "Organizing some documents," he replied, but his voice was tense. "I came back because I forgot important papers for tomorrow's meeting." "In the middle of the night? With a flashlight?" questioned Mrs. Eleanor. "Richard, don't treat me like a fool. You're trying to hide evidence." The conversation that followed confirmed Ashley's worst fears. Mr. Richard wasn't just trying to hide documents, but also planning ways to discredit her testimony and Mrs. Eleanor's. "Eleanor," he said, trying to sound rational, "you need to understand that this girl is manipulating you. She clearly researched Sarah and David, maybe even met someone who knew them. She's using your emotions to take advantage of our wealth." "Then explain how she got documents that were locked in your library," countered Mrs. Eleanor. "She could have gotten in here when we were out," suggested Mr. Richard. "Or perhaps you showed her the documents yourself and don't remember. You've been very forgetful lately." The attempt to make Mrs. Eleanor doubt her own sanity left Ashley furious. She went down the stairs silently, determined to defend the woman who had finally become her family. "You're lying," said Ashley as she appeared in the library. "And I can prove it." Mr. Richard turned abruptly, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Child, go back to your room. The adults are talking." "I have more evidence," Ashley said bravely. "Things I found that you don't know about." It was a bluff, but it worked. Mr. Richard seemed genuinely worried. "What evidence?" he asked. "If I tell you, you'll try to destroy it too," said Ashley. "But I can say there are people in town who know the truth about what happened to my parents." Mr. Richard studied Ashley's face, trying to determine if she was lying. The girl kept a serious and determined expression, as if she really possessed compromising information. "Eleanor," Mr. Richard finally said, "we need to talk about this more calmly tomorrow. We're all tired and upset." "No," Mrs. Eleanor said firmly. "I've waited too long for answers. I want to know now, Richard. What really happened to Sarah and David?" The moment of truth had arrived. Mr. Richard looked at his wife and at Ashley, realizing there was no way to escape anymore. Slowly, he sat behind the library desk and buried his face in his hands. "They wouldn't listen to reason," he finally said. "They insisted on proceeding with a project that was going to ruin us financially. I tried to explain that the costs had tripled, that the legislation had changed, that it would be an economic disaster." "And then," pressed Mrs. Eleanor, "I said that if they didn't back down voluntarily, I would be forced to take more drastic measures. There were important investors questioning the project, people who could harm not only the bank but the whole family." "What drastic measures?" asked Ashley, though she feared the answer. Mr. Richard raised his face, and Ashley could see tears in his eyes for the first time. "I told local authorities that there were suspicions of irregularities in the project. I suggested that Sarah and David might be trying to embezzle funds. It wasn't true, but I needed them to leave town before the situation got more complicated." "You destroyed their reputation," said Mrs. Eleanor, horrified. "I thought it would be temporary," Mr. Richard continued, "that after the dust settled, they could come back and start over. But then—" "Then what?" pressed Ashley. "Then the news of the accident came," Mr. Richard finished in a low voice. "I learned they had tried to come back to get their daughter, but the road was bad because of the rain and—" The word he couldn't pronounce hung in the air like a condemnation. Ashley felt the world spinning around her. Her parents had died trying to come back for her, and Mr. Richard had known this all these years. "You knew they were dead," said Mrs. Eleanor, her voice filled with emotion. "You knew and never told me. You let me spend years consumed by guilt and worry." "Eleanor, I wanted to protect you," Mr. Richard said desperately. "If you knew the truth, you'd be devastated. And worse, if you found out I had a part in it." "A part in it," repeated Mrs. Eleanor. "Richard, you caused this. If you hadn't forced them to flee, they'd still be alive." The accusation left Mr. Richard visibly shaken. He tried to defend himself, but the words came out confused and contradictory. "I didn't want anything bad to happen to them. I just wanted to protect our interests. How could I know they would try to come back in those conditions?" "Because you knew them," shouted Mrs. Eleanor. "You knew Sarah would never abandon her daughter. You knew they would do anything to come back home." Ashley was in shock, but gradually anger began to take over. This man had not only stolen her parents' land, but had been responsible for their death and for all the years of suffering she had endured at the shelter. "You owe me a full explanation," said Ashley, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. "I want to know everything that happened, every detail." Mr. Richard looked at the girl for a long moment, and something in his face changed. Perhaps it was Ashley's resemblance to Sarah, or perhaps it was the weight of the guilt he had carried for years, but he began to speak. "The housing project was truly a good idea in the beginning," he said. "Sarah and David had a beautiful vision of creating decent homes for families in need. I supported it because I believed in the project's social and economic potential." He paused, gathering strength to continue. "But when we started studying the details, we realized the costs would be much higher than projected. The municipal legislation had changed, requiring a series of expensive adjustments. The suppliers raised their prices. Within a few months, what was supposed to be a profitable project turned into a potential financial disaster." "And you didn't explain this to them?" asked Mrs. Eleanor. "I did," replied Mr. Richard, "but they didn't want to listen. Sarah was pregnant and talked about leaving a legacy for their daughter. David said they had already invested everything they owned and couldn't back out. They refused to even consider the possibility of cancelling the project." Ashley could imagine her parents, young and full of dreams, fighting for a project that meant so much more than money to them. "So you decided to force them to give up?" she asked. "I tried to convince them in other ways first," said Mr. Richard. "I offered to buy their share in the project, proposed changes to the scope, suggested a postponement. But they were determined to move forward, even if it meant ruin for all of us." "And that's when you involved the authorities?" pressed Mrs. Eleanor. Mr. Richard nodded slowly. "I knew people at City Hall and the City Council. I suggested there were irregularities in the project, that perhaps a deeper investigation was needed before releasing the final permits. I didn't directly accuse Sarah and David of anything illegal, but I planted doubts about the venture's viability." "But that had consequences far greater than you expected," said Ashley. "Much greater," admitted Mr. Richard. "The suspicions spread quickly through the town. People began to question Sarah and David's honesty. Some of the project's smaller investors demanded their money back. Within weeks, their reputation was ruined." Mrs. Eleanor shook her head in disbelief. "And then you suggested they leave town?" "It seemed the only solution," said Mr. Richard defensively. "I said it would be temporary, that after the situation calmed down, we could find a way to rehabilitate them. Sarah was in her late pregnancy. It would be better for her to have the baby in a less tense environment." "But they didn't accept," said Ashley. "Not initially," confirmed Mr. Richard. "David said they wouldn't run away like criminals. Sarah cried and begged me to find another solution, but when a rumor started that the district attorney's office might open a formal investigation, they finally agreed to leave." Ashley felt her heart tighten, imagining her parents' despair, forced to abandon their town, their friends, and their newborn daughter because of a greedy man's manipulations. "And the land?" she asked. "How did you manage to keep their property?" Mr. Richard hesitated before answering this question. Technically, the land was still registered in their name when they left, but since the property was abandoned and there was default on some financial commitments related to the project, the bank obtained a court order to take over management of the land. "A court order based on what?" pressed Mrs. Eleanor, "if they haven't been formally charged with any crime?" "Based on the debts incurred for the project and the abandonment of the property," said Mr. Richard, but his voice lacked conviction. "It was all done within the law." "Questionable legality," said Ashley, "especially considering that you were the one who created the circumstances that forced my parents to abandon the property." Mr. Richard did not answer, but his expression made it clear that he knew his actions had been, at the very least, morally questionable. "And after the accident?" asked Mrs. Eleanor. "When you learned they had died?" "I was in shock," said Mr. Richard, and for the first time his emotions seemed genuine. "I never wanted anything like that to happen. I never imagined they would try to return in those weather conditions." "But you knew why they were returning," said Ashley. "They were coming back to get me." Mr. Richard nodded slowly. "The sheriff who investigated the accident told me that documents were found in the car indicating they intended to pick up their daughter and start a new life elsewhere. There was even a job offer letter for David in a small town in Texas." The information was like a dagger to Ashley's heart. Her parents had found a new opportunity, were planning to rebuild their lives and come for her. If they had managed to complete the trip, she would never have spent a single day in the shelter. "Why did you never tell this to Mrs. Eleanor?" asked Ashley, struggling to hold back tears. "Because I was afraid," admitted Mr. Richard. "Afraid that Eleanor would discover my part in the tragedy. Afraid of losing my family, my reputation, everything I had built in my life." "So you preferred to let her suffer years of guilt and remorse," said Mrs. Eleanor bitterly. "I thought it would be better for everyone if some secrets remained buried," said Mr. Richard. "That nothing I could say would bring Sarah and David back, but it could destroy our family." "Our family was already destroyed," said Mrs. Eleanor. "It was destroyed from the moment you decided to put money above friendship and honesty." The silence that followed was heavy and charged with emotion. Ashley looked at Mr. Richard and saw not the powerful, intimidating man she had known, but a human being broken by the weight of his own actions. "What happens now?" she finally asked. Mr. Richard lifted his face, and there was a resignation in his eyes that wasn't there before. "Now I pay for my choices," he said. "The land will be returned to you, as it should have been years ago. I will arrange the necessary documentation to transfer the property to your name." "And what about the rest?" asked Mrs. Eleanor. "The lies, the manipulation, the years of suffering you caused." "That," said Mr. Richard, "I cannot undo. I can only try to repair what is possible and accept the consequences of what I did." Ashley studied the face of the man who had destroyed her parents' lives. Part of her wanted to see him punished, publicly humiliated as Sarah and David had been. But another part of her, perhaps the part that had inherited her mother's generosity, recognized that revenge would not bring her parents back, nor erase years of pain. "I want justice," she said finally. "But I don't want destruction. I want the truth to be known and for people to know that my parents were honest. And I want guarantees that something like this will never happen to other families again." Mr. Richard nodded slowly. "What kind of guarantees?" Ashley looked at Mrs. Eleanor, who encouraged her with a nod. "The land that belonged to my parents will be used for their original project," said Ashley. "We will build homes for families in need, exactly as Sarah and David dreamed." "And where will the resources for this come from?" asked Mr. Richard. "From you," answered Ashley without hesitation. "It will be your way of repairing the harm you've done, and Mrs. Eleanor will supervise the project to ensure it's done honestly." The proposal left Mr. Richard visibly shaken, but he did not protest. Perhaps he knew it was a small price to pay for the crimes he had committed. "And publicly?" he asked. "What will be said about all of this?" "The truth," said Mrs. Eleanor firmly. "We will tell the town exactly what happened. Sarah and David will be cleared of any suspicion, and you will take responsibility for your actions." "This will ruin my reputation," said Mr. Richard. "Your reputation was built on lies," replied Ashley. "Perhaps it's time to find out who you really are when you don't have false appearances to hide behind." The conversation stretched until dawn, with details being agreed upon and responsibilities being defined. When it finally ended, the three were exhausted, but Ashley felt an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. In the weeks that followed, Golden Ridge experienced a transformation that no one expected. The story of Sarah, David, and Ashley spread through the town, initially as shocked whispers, then as a legend of perseverance and justice. Mrs. Eleanor kept her promise to officially adopt Ashley in a simple but emotional ceremony at the town hall. For the first time in her life, Ashley had a birth certificate that showed the name of a living and present mother. The housing project of Sarah and David was resumed, now with guaranteed funding and strict supervision. Mr. Richard, fulfilling his part of the agreement, provided the necessary resources and gradually stepped back from the bank's business, transferring management to younger, more ethical administrators. The first house built in the project was donated to a family of farmers who had lost their property in a prolonged drought. At the key handover ceremony, Ashley gave a speech that moved everyone present. "This house represents more than bricks and cement," she said, now an eloquent and confident 9-year-old girl. "It represents my parents' dreams, who wanted every family to have a decent place to call home. Every house we build here will be a victory against greed and proof that love always wins over selfishness." Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out, now continuing. The most remarkable transformation, however, happened in the relationship between Ashley and Mrs. Eleanor. The elderly lady, energized by the mission of honoring her best friend's memory, rediscovered a vitality she thought she had lost forever. She taught Ashley about gardening, about the history of Golden Ridge, about the traditions of the family that was now hers too. "You know," Mrs. Eleanor said one afternoon as they tended the rose bushes together, "I always thought my life was over when Sarah left. I thought I would never be truly happy again. But taking care of you, watching you grow and flourish, has given me a new purpose." Ashley smiled, her small hands skillful with the gardening tools. "You saved my life," she replied, "not just by giving me a family, but by helping me discover who I really am." "No," said Mrs. Eleanor, hugging the girl, "you saved my life. You gave me the chance to finally do the right thing, Mr. Richard, for his part, faced the consequences of his actions with a dignity that surprised many in the town. He voluntarily submitted to an official investigation into his banking practices, fully cooperated with authorities, and established a restitution fund for other families who may have been harmed by his questionable decisions. "I spent my life building an image of success and respectability," he said in an interview with the local newspaper. "But I've found that real success isn't what you accumulate, it's what you leave behind. I hope my final legacy will be correcting the mistakes I made." The most profound change in Mr. Richard manifested in his relationship with Ashley. Initially tense and laden with guilt, their relationship gradually evolved into something close to mutual respect. He never tried to assume the role of a grandfather, respecting the space Ashley needed to process everything that had happened. "I know I can never make up for what I took from you," he said to Ashley a few months after the truth was revealed. "Your parents, your childhood, your security, but I want you to know I will dedicate the rest of my life to trying to repair that harm." Ashley, mature beyond her years, considered the words carefully before responding. "You can't bring my parents back," she said, "but you can make sure other children don't go through what I went through. You can use your influence and resources to do good, instead of just protecting your own interests." That is how the Sarah and David Foundation was born, an organization dedicated to helping orphans and vulnerable families. Mr. Richard donated a significant portion of his fortune to the foundation, which was managed by a board including Mrs. Eleanor, community representatives, and when she turned 18, Ashley herself. The town of Golden Ridge was transformed. The housing project expanded, creating not just houses but a true community. A school was built on the adjacent land, followed by a health clinic and a community center. What had begun as the dream of two young people became a reality that benefited hundreds of families. Mr. George, the gardener who had helped Ashley from the beginning, was promoted to general supervisor of the construction projects. His practical experience and knowledge of the local terrain proved invaluable to the venture's success. "I never thought I'd see the day when Sarah and David's dreams would become reality," he said to Ashley during the inauguration of the project's 20th house. "Your parents would be so proud of you." The girl who had fled to a mountain cave became a confident and determined young woman. At 10 years old, Ashley was already speaking at community meetings, helping to plan new social projects, and studying diligently to prepare for the future she could now see clearly. "I want to study architecture and urban planning," she said to Mrs. Eleanor during one of their nightly conversations. "I want to learn to design not just houses, but entire communities, places where families can grow up happy and safe. Mrs. Eleanor smiled with maternal pride. Sarah always said she wanted to leave the world better for her daughter. I think she succeeded, through you. The mountain cave, where it all began, became a special place for Ashley. She visited the spot regularly, no longer as a desperate refuge but as a personal sanctuary, where she could connect with her origins and reflect on her journey. During one of these visits, she found Mr. George placing a small bronze plaque at the cave's entrance. The inscription read, "Here began the journey of Ashley Mitchell, who transformed pain into hope and loneliness into family, in memory of Sarah and David Mitchell, who planted seeds of kindness that continue to bloom." "It was Mrs. Eleanor's idea," explained Mr. George. "She said this place deserved to be remembered as the cradle of a new era for Golden Ridge." Ashley touched the plaque tenderly, remembering the frightened, rejected girl who had hidden in that cave 2 years ago. It was hard to believe all the transformation that had happened since then. The impact of Ashley's story spread beyond the borders of Golden Ridge. Journalists from larger cities came to cover the housing project and the extraordinary journey of the orphan girl who had unraveled a family mystery and turned an injustice into an opportunity for community growth. "This isn't just the story of a brave girl," wrote a reporter from Dallas. "It's the story of how a community can come together to right the wrongs of the past and build a fairer future for everyone." The media attention brought visitors and investors interested in replicating the Golden Ridge model in other towns. Mrs. Eleanor and Ashley began traveling regularly to share their experience and guide communities that wanted to implement similar projects. "Every place is unique," Ashley would explain during these presentations. "It's not about copying exactly what we did, but about adapting the principles, transparency, community participation, and the commitment to do what's right, even when it's hard." The relationship between Ashley and Mr. Richard continued to evolve in unexpected ways. The man who had once been her greatest adversary became not a friend, but a sort of silent mentor. He never tried to artificially insert himself into her life, but was always available when she needed guidance on practical or legal matters. "Why do you help the project so much?" Ashley asked during one of these consultations. "You've paid your debt many times over." Mr. Richard reflected for a moment before answering. "Because I've learned that fixing a mistake isn't something you do once and it's done," he said. "It's a daily commitment to choosing to do better. Every day I work for the good of the community is a day I honor the memory of your parents." As Ashley grew, her understanding of the events that had shaped her life deepened. She studied not only the practical aspects of community development, but also the psychological and ethical dimensions of human conflict. "Hating Mr. Richard would be easy," she confessed to Mrs. Eleanor in one of their more mature conversations. "But hate doesn't build houses or heal communities. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or accepting what was done wrong. It means choosing not to let the evil of the past prevent the good of the future." Ashley's precocious wisdom impressed everyone who knew her. Teachers, social workers, and even psychologists working with traumatized children came to study her resilience and her ability to transform negative experiences into positive strength. Ashley is an extraordinary example of how a human being can transcend their circumstances, wrote a child psychologist in an academic paper. Her ability to maintain hope and compassion despite all she suffered offers valuable insights into the nature of human resilience. But for Ashley, the academic attention was secondary. Her main motivation remained practical, to help other children and families going through difficulties similar to hers. At 12 years old, she established a mentorship program at the shelter, where she had spent her early childhood. Once a week, Ashley would visit St. Joseph's Home to talk with children who were facing rejections in adoption attempts. "I know what it's like to feel like nobody wants you," she would tell these children, "but I want you to know that doesn't define who you are. You have value, you have potential, and you have the power to create your own families when you grow up." Mrs. Margaret, the director of the shelter who had witnessed Ashley's transformation, often became emotional seeing the girl working with the other children. "She has a special gift," Mrs. Margaret would comment. She can reach children that we adults sometimes cannot. Perhaps it's because she truly understands what they are going through. The mentorship program expanded rapidly. Other people who had overcome childhood trauma volunteered to help, creating a support network that benefited not only the children at the shelter, but also at-risk youth throughout the region. "We are creating something much bigger than houses," noted Mrs. Eleanor during a foundation board meeting. "We are building a network of care and support that can withstand any storm." The housing project, which had begun as Sarah and David's dream, evolved into a model of sustainable development that attracted international attention. Delegations from other countries visited Golden Ridge to study how a small American town had managed to combine economic growth with social justice. "The secret isn't in any special construction technique or funding," Ashley would explain to these visitors. "It's in treating each family as if they were your own family. It's in understanding that real development means human development." Ashley's maturity sometimes surprised even Mrs. Eleanor, who had truly become her mother in every emotional sense. "Sometimes I wonder if you're really a child," Mrs. Eleanor would joke. "You speak with a wisdom that many adults never develop." "I had to grow up fast," Ashley would respond with a sad smile. "But that doesn't mean I lost my childhood. It means I learned that childhood can be lived in different ways." And it was true. Despite all the responsibilities she had taken on, Ashley still found time to be a child. She played in the garden with the children from families helped by the project, learned to cook traditional recipes with Mrs. Eleanor, and kept a diary where she recorded not only deep reflections, but also dreams and worries typical of a girl her age. "I dream of seeing the ocean one day," she wrote in one diary entry. "I want to see if it's as blue as Mama Eleanor told me. And I want to take all the children from the shelter with me so they can also dream of endless horizons." The dream became reality the following year, when the Sarah and David Foundation organized a special trip to the beach. More than 50 children from shelters and families assisted by the project traveled to the coast, many of them seeing the ocean for the first time. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," said Ashley, standing in the sand with the wind tousling her hair. "It's as if we could see all the world's possibilities at once." The trip became an annual event, funded by donations from the community and visitors who had been inspired by the story of Golden Ridge. It was a concrete way to show the children that the world was much bigger than their current circumstances, and that big dreams were not only possible, but necessary. As Ashley grew, her vision for the future also expanded. She didn't just want to continue the local development work, but also to influence public policy at the state and national level. "What happened to me and my parents cannot keep happening to other families," she said in a lecture to university students. "We need stricter laws against corruption, more transparency in public business, and more protection for vulnerable families." Her eloquence and passion caught the attention of politicians and social activists. At 14, Ashley was already regularly consulted on issues related to children's rights and community development. "She has a unique perspective," commented a state representative who had visited Golden Ridge. "She combines personal experience with technical knowledge and a very clear ethical vision. She's exactly the kind of leadership our country needs." But to all who knew her well, the most remarkable aspect of Ashley was not her intellectual precocity or her leadership ability, but her capacity to maintain compassion and humility despite all the recognition she received. "I never forget where I came from," she said during an interview on local television. "Every achievement I reach is a reminder that there are thousands of other children still waiting for their opportunity. My success only has meaning if it can be used to help other people." Ashley's philosophy was reflected in all her actions. When she received a full scholarship to a prestigious private school in Dallas, she negotiated for 2 other children from Golden Ridge to also be benefited. "Education should not be a privilege," she explained to the school principal. "If you truly want to make a difference, you can't limit yourselves to helping just one child when you have the resources to help several." The school not only accepted the proposal, but also created a permanent scholarship program for students from underprivileged communities, inspired by Ashley's attitude. Ashley's relationship with her family history also continued to evolve. At 15, she decided to visit the site where her parents had suffered the accident that ended their lives. It was a winding mountain road, known to be dangerous on rainy days. Mrs. Eleanor initially hesitated to accompany her, fearing the visit might be traumatic. "I need to go," said Ashley. "I need to fully understand their journey, including the end." The trip was emotionally intense but also healing. At the accident site, now marked by a simple cross the community had erected, Ashley was finally able to cry for her parents in a way she hadn't been able to before. "They died trying to get to me," she told Mrs. Eleanor, tears flowing freely. "That means they loved me more than life itself. How can I not honor that love by living the best way possible?" The visit marked a new phase in Ashley's emotional journey. She began to speak more openly about the loss, to attend support groups for people who had lost parents early, and to write about her experiences in a more personal and vulnerable way. "Losing your parents is not something you get over," she wrote in an essay that was published in a national magazine. "It's something you learn to carry. The pain transforms, but it never completely disappears, and that's not necessarily bad. The pain is proof that love existed, and love is the only thing that makes life truly meaningful." The essay touched thousands of readers and generated invitations for Ashley to speak at conferences on grief and resilience. She accepted some of these invitations, always careful not to become just a public figure, but to keep her roots in the community that had helped raise her. "My primary responsibility is to Golden Ridge and to the people who helped me get where I am," she would tell event organizers. "I can travel and talk about our experience, but my main life and work must remain here." This loyalty to her origins made Ashley even more respected in the community. People who had initially doubted her leadership ability due to her age were gradually won over by her consistency and dedication. "She could have moved to a big city and built a career for herself," commented a longtime town resident. "But she chose to stay and continue building what she started. That shows the kind of person she really is." The housing project, now in its second decade, had become an internationally recognized model. Universities from various countries sent students for internships in Golden Ridge, and international development organizations frequently consulted the foundation about best practices for similar projects. "We started out wanting to help a few local families," reflected Mrs. Eleanor, now over 70 but still active in supervising the projects. "We never imagined our little dream would become something that would inspire people from all over the world." Mrs. Eleanor's transformation had also been remarkable. The melancholy, fragile woman Ashley had met had become a respected community leader and a loving grandmother. Her health had improved significantly with her new life purpose, and doctors often commented on the healing power of active social engagement. "Caring for Ashley and working at the foundation gave me a reason to live that I thought I had lost forever," she would tell friends. "Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the greatest tragedies." Mr. Richard, now retired and dedicating all his time to volunteer work, had become a different figure in the community. His personal transformation was seen by many as proof that people can truly change when confronted with the consequences of their actions. "He's not the man he used to be," observed Mr. George, who now managed a team of over 20 employees on the construction projects. "Genuine remorse has turned him into someone completely different." The relationship between Mr. Richard and Ashley had evolved into something complex but respectful. They never became emotionally close, but developed an effective professional partnership in running the foundation. "I learned to separate the person from their actions," Ashley explained, when asked how she could work with the man who had caused so much suffering to her family. "He did terrible things, but he also demonstrated a capacity for change and a genuine desire to make amends. I may not completely forgive the past, but I can recognize and support his attempts to do better in the present." This capacity for nuance and moral complexity impressed psychologists and philosophers who studied ethical development in young people who had experienced significant trauma. "Ashley has developed a sophisticated understanding of restorative justice," commented a researcher from the University of Texas. "She understands that pure punishment isn't enough to heal social wounds. It's necessary to create opportunities for reparation and growth." When she turned 16, Ashley organized a special celebration that reflected her life philosophy. Instead of a traditional party, she called a community assembly where new foundation projects were announced. A public library, a vocational training center, and a microcredit program for local small business owners. 16 years ago, an orphaned girl was born in this town, she told the packed assembly. Today, that girl has a family, a community, and a mission. But most importantly, she is not alone in that mission. We are all part of something bigger than our individual stories. The speech was followed by a surprise Ashley hadn't expected. The community had secretly organized a collective gift, a monument in the city center, honoring Sarah and David Mitchell, with a plaque that read, "In memory of two dreamers who planted seeds of hope that continue to bloom through their daughter and all who believe in a better world." Ashley cried upon seeing the monument, not only from the emotion of seeing her parents publicly honored, but also from the understanding that her journey had inspired an entire community to believe in the possibility of positive change. "This monument isn't just for my parents," she said during the unveiling ceremony. "It's for all the dreamers who refuse to accept injustices as permanent. It's for everyone who believes that love can conquer fear and hope can conquer despair." As Ashley approached adulthood, she began planning the next phase of her life and work. She had been accepted to several prestigious universities, but decided to study at the University of Texas to remain close to Golden Ridge. "I want to study law and public policy," she announced during a foundation board meeting. "I believe I can do more for social justice if I deeply understand how laws and institutions work." Mrs. Eleanor fully supported the decision, though she confessed she would miss having Ashley at home every day. "You need to fly with your own wings," she told the young woman, who had truly become her daughter. "But you will always have a home here, and you will always have a family that loves you and supports your dreams." Ashley's high school graduation party became a community event that drew visitors from several cities. She was the class valedictorian, and her speech summarized the philosophy that had guided her life since discovering that box in the cave. "Education isn't just about accumulating knowledge," she told her classmates. "It's about using that knowledge to build a world where more people have access to the same opportunities we've had. It's about remembering that our individual good fortune only has meaning if it can be shared with others." The speech was recorded and later used in educational campaigns throughout the state of Texas. Ashley had become not only a local leader, but a nationally recognized voice advocating for children's rights and sustainable community development. But for those who had known her since she was little, the most remarkable aspect of Ashley remained her fundamental humanity. Despite all the attention and recognition, she remained accessible, humble, and genuinely interested in the lives of the people around her. "She asks me about my grandchildren, remembers everyone's birthdays in the community, and is never too busy to listen to someone's problems," commented one of the first families helped by the housing project. "It's hard to believe someone so young can be so wise and compassionate." On the eve of her departure for university, Ashley made one last visit to the cave in the mountain where it all began. This time, she wasn't alone. Mrs. Eleanor, Mr. George, and several children from the mentorship program accompanied her. "This place changed my life," she told the group. "Here, I discovered that sometimes we need to hide to find our true strength. But I also discovered that real strength only has value when it's used to help others so they don't need to hide." She had prepared a small ceremony to mark the transition. Each child present placed a stone on a small cairn they built at the cave entrance, representing their own hopes for the future. "These stones will remain here to remind everyone who passes by that no matter how dark the place we find ourselves in," said Ashley, "there is always a way out. There is always hope, and there are always people willing to help if we have the courage to look for them." The university brought new challenges and opportunities for Ashley. She studied diligently, but also continued her community work, now with a broader perspective on public policy and social development. During her first years of college, she developed a research project on innovative models of social housing that became an academic reference. But more important than the academic recognition was her ability to translate theory into practice, always testing her ideas in the living laboratory of Golden Ridge. "The university gave me tools to better understand the problems I already knew in practice," she explained to younger students. But real education comes from the community, from real people facing real problems. When she graduated in law at 22, Ashley had already established a reputation as one of the country's most promising young leaders in the field of social development. Job offers came from international organizations, prestigious law firms, and high-level government agencies. But her choice surprised many. She decided to return to Golden Ridge and establish a community law office, offering free legal services to low-income families and social organizations. "All the opportunities in the world are worth nothing if I forget why I started this journey," she said during her graduation speech. "My responsibility is to the people who helped me get here, and to all the other children still waiting for their chance to discover their potential." Ashley's office quickly became a reference center for social justice issues in the region. She developed partnerships with local universities to offer internships to law students, creating a program that combined legal practice with community education. "We want to train lawyers who understand that the law must serve justice, not just those who can pay for it," she explained to the interns. "That means working not only in the courts, but also in the communities, helping people understand their rights and how to exercise them." The impact of Ashley's work multiplied when she began systematically documenting the cases she handled, creating a database on rights violations in rural communities that became valuable for researchers and policymakers. "Every case we handle tells a story about how our laws and institutions are working in practice," she said at academic conferences. "These stories are fundamental to understanding where we need to improve our justice system." At 25, Ashley was invited to join a national commission on children's and adolescents' rights. She was the youngest person ever appointed to such a position, but her unique experience and practical knowledge were considered essential for the commission's work. "She brings a perspective that none of us have," commented the commission's coordinator. "She combines personal experience with the child protection system, solid legal knowledge, and practical experience in community development. It's exactly what we need to create more effective policies." The work on the commission led Ashley to travel across the country, encountering diverse realities and learning about different approaches to problems similar to those she had faced. Each trip was also an opportunity to share the lessons learned in Golden Ridge. "The United States is a vast country with very different realities," she noted in commission reports. "But the fundamental principles are universal. Every child deserves a family. Every family deserves decent living conditions, and every community has the potential to grow if given the proper support." During one of these trips, Ashley visited a shelter in rural Oregon, facing problems similar to those she had experienced. There she met an 8-year-old girl who had been rejected by several families and was beginning to lose hope. "How did you do it?" the girl asked after hearing Ashley's story. "How did you not give up when everyone gave up on you?" The question touched Ashley deeply, reminding her of the lonely girl she had once been. "I found that when we ourselves don't give up, someone always appears who is willing to believe in us," she replied. "And when that happens, our responsibility is to do the same for other people." The visit resulted in the creation of a pilot mentorship program based on the model developed in Golden Ridge. Ashley personally trained the local team and helped adapt the program to the specific needs of the Amazon region. "Every community is unique, but the power of human connection is universal," she explained to the new mentors. "What we do here is not apply a ready-made formula, but create spaces where authentic relationships can develop." The program's success in Oregon led to invitations to replicate the model in other regions. Gradually, the network of programs inspired by the Golden Ridge experience expanded across the country, always with local adaptations, but maintaining the fundamental principles. "We are creating a web of care that extends far beyond our original city," observed Mrs. Eleanor, now 80 years old but still active as an honorary advisor to the foundation. "Sarah and David never imagined their dream could reach so many people." Ashley herself was sometimes surprised by the extent of her story's impact. Letters regularly arrived from young people who had been inspired by her example, from families who had benefited from the projects, and from professionals who had changed their careers to dedicate themselves to social work. "It's not about me," she always insisted when asked about her role as an inspiration. It's about what's possible when people decide to work together for something greater than their own interests. I was just lucky to discover that early in life. By age 30, Ashley had already written 2 books on community development and children's rights that became references in the field. But her most ambitious project was just beginning: the creation of a community university in Golden Ridge. We want to train a new generation of leaders who understand that knowledge and power should be used to serve communities, not to separate from them, she explained during the launch of the fundraising campaign for the project. The idea attracted support from educators, social entrepreneurs, and even international organizations. In 5 years, the Golden Ridge Community University campus was ready, offering courses focused on sustainable development, social justice, and community leadership. "This university represents everything I've learned throughout my life," Ashley said during the inauguration ceremony. "That true education is not about leaving where we come from, but about returning home with more tools to help our community grow." The university's first dean was Mr. George, who at 65 had completed a higher education course in administration specifically to take on the role. His appointment symbolized the institution's philosophy of valuing practical experience and community wisdom as much as academic credentials. "When Ashley was a little girl hiding on my property, I never imagined that one day we would be working together as university colleagues," he said in his inauguration speech. "It shows you never know where small acts of kindness can lead." The university quickly gained recognition for its innovative teaching methods, which combined academic rigor with hands-on community work. Students from across the country applied to study there, drawn by the opportunity to learn in an environment where theory and practice went hand in hand. "Our graduates don't just know theories about social development," Ashley would proudly say. "They have real experience helping communities solve concrete problems. They leave here prepared to make a difference wherever they work." The university's success caught the attention of international educators, and soon Golden Ridge was welcoming exchange students from various countries. The small town that had once been a stage for injustice and corruption had become a reference center for social justice education. "It's surreal to think our little town has become an international destination for people interested in social change," Mrs. Eleanor commented during one of the many graduation ceremonies she witnessed. "But at the same time, it makes perfect sense. It was always a place where extraordinary things happen when people truly dedicate themselves to the common good." End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story of overcoming injustice. Do you believe Ashley made the right decisions throughout her journey? Leave your honest comment about this story of a courageous orphan who turned pain into hope and injustice into opportunity. We look forward to reading your opinion and knowing where you are watching from. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.